Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today I'm proud to bring you Pop Culture Pantheons with John Carl Pepe and Paul Dale Roberts, comic book masterpieces and masterminds and masters of many other obscure comic book related things. Today on our episode, we're going to be looking at post-apocalyptic mythological worlds and figures, Hercules in the Marvel Universe and Hercules in the DC Universe. And these are two kind of unusual portrayals of our hero. So I guess we'll start with John.
Sure. So we'll stick in the realm of the Marvel universe, since that's kind of where we had started in the previous ones. And in the mid to late 80s, early 90s, writer Peter David, who unfortunately is no longer with us, passed away a few months ago this year. Amazing, prolific writer. Wrote, a bunch of the big guys for DC and Marvel. Had some Spider-Man under his belt. Had an incredibly lengthy Hulk run where he really did a lot of reconstructing the mythos from the past, and then kind of forged a path for the future of not only Hulk, but of the Marvel Universe. And also, if you're a big Star Trek fan, he did a whole
Yes,
bunch of Star Trek stuff, bunch of novels, wrote DC's second volume. I think had a couple stories in the first volume from DC. But when DC restarted Star Trek again in the early 90s, yeah, he was basically the guy writing that book. Just he was an amazing, like I said, prolific writer, and sorry to see him go, but his work does remain. One of the things he did on the Incredible Hulk was took a what had always been determined to be a coloring error, and made it continuity. So as the story goes, when Incredible Hulk #1 came out in the early 60s, they decided, according to Stan, to make the Hulk gray. But printing what it was at that time couldn't quite handle that grayscale. So, as Stan wrote famously in the Origins of Marvel Comics book from Fireside, there's a Fireside book, is one of the first Marvel trades, which would reprint the origin stories and then contemporary stories to 1975, of the characters. So you kind of get the beginning and you kind of catch up close to where they were at the time. And in between, Stan would sort of write his version of creating the Marvel characters, along with, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko. He definitely would credit them, but in typical Stan Lee fashion, it was all Stan, Stan, Stan. And then the other guys helped, right? So he explains that when they got the Incredible Hulk #1 back from the press, every page the Hulk was a different color because that grayscale just wouldn't take, and other colors, I guess, got picked up in that. So he says in there, there's one page where Hulk is this fabulous shade of jade, and we decided going forward, true believer, that was the Hulk's color. He was going to be green going forward. But and then another kind of thing that was neat about that book, he said, because you're holding this tremendous tome in your hands. I'm doing my best stand with the alliteration as best I can. Um, because you're holding this tremendous tome in your hands, we've done you a favor and taken on the liberty of recoloring the Hulk from that first appearance in the jolly green giant jade shade that we all know and love. And so that's how it remained until about 1988, when Peter David was picking up the reins of writing the Incredible Hulk, and was shortly joined by a superstar artist who worked in the indie, I think for First Comics. He did a series called Coyote. He went to DC. He was a big part of Infinity Inc. And then transported over to Marvel, where he started drawing Hulk and eventually Amazing Spider-Man. And then kind of disappeared from Marvel after a while. I think he's done a few things. I think he still does some comics, and I think he does some toys as well. No, seriously, if you know Todd McFarlane, you know that
Yes.
that man is, he is living large in the comic world. He's not called the Todd Father for nothing. One of the founders of Image Comics, his famous character that he created was Spawn, which does continue to this day. He still does a lot of work on that, and he's got a great toy company. So, with Todd McFarlane coming in, Peter David wanted to sort of bring back that concept of the Hulk being gray. And Peter David was doing a lot of multiple personality. That Banner had MPD, right? And there were a lot of different versions of the Hulk running around in his head. And so for a couple years, while Todd was drawing that book, they had a gray Hulk who had a much different personality than the Hulk that we had known up to that point. From the TV show and the comics of the day, Hulk smash puny humans and all that. And the gray Hulk was more conniving, was really determined to kill Bruce Banner, even though he knew it would probably lead to him also expiring, but felt that the nature of being a Hulk would allow that persona to survive whatever damage he even did to Bruce Banner. Very famous scene, because at that point, also, this was back in the original Hulk, the change came about at night. It wasn't just anger. That came a little bit later. So an original Hulk #1, and that Peter David carried over with this gray Hulk persona. The change was triggered by nightfall. And a great sequence, a little bit of digression, which is fine because Peter David's column in Comic Shop News was, or Comic Buyer's Guide was called But I Digress. But I digress again. So it's about dawn. Hulk smashes into a liquor store in this small town and is determined to imbibe the entire alcoholic contents of that store, so that when the change happened to Bruce Banner at sunrise, Bruce Banner would die from alcohol poisoning. And it's some great panel work by Todd, where like Hulk's holding a bottle of Jack Daniels and he doesn't twist it off. He just kind of flicks his finger, and then the top just cracks off, and then he's just downing these bottles of alcohol. Suffice to say, Banner did survive that experience, and his debacles with both Hulk's gray, green, and other continued on through Peter David's run, and even to this very day. So during about the midpoint of his run, Peter David brought back the Green Hulk, but with the help of Doc Samson, a Hulk ally, another gamma-irradiated Hulk ally, and through many psychiatric sessions and delving into the Hulk's inner mind and finding these other personas, there was sort of a compromise that was made between the Gray Hulk persona and the Green Hulk smash persona and Banner, which led to what is known as Professor Hulk. So it was a fully hulked out Bruce Banner, looked like the Hulk, but, had Banner's mind, and maybe possibly a little smarter than Banner, because you still also had those Hulk personas in there as well. We've actually seen this recently portrayed in the movies, where Mark Ruffalo's Hulk has now kind of fully embraced that dual shared persona, that Professor Hulk type persona. But Peter David's Professor Hulk was really just like not just a super scientist in the Hulk's body, but was also just an action star in his own right. And there was a whole thing where he joined the society called the Pantheon, and he was fighting for them until I guess he had to fight against them. But he was all Rambo'd out, man, because he had like the gun belt, the ammo belt and the giant gun. So he wasn't just fists, and smashing. He was also doing a lot of shooting, lasers and whatnot. And so outside of the regular Hulk series, Peter David with another fantastic artist, George Perez, who we also lost about 3 years ago now, did a 2-part storyline called Future Imperfect, where basically we are now Professor Hulk from the present day is transported into the future, where his Hulk persona got to the point where he just became a megalomaniacal maniac of hell bent on ruling the world. Took out all the heroes, took out all the villains, had a trophy room, which is a great spread in that book. If you ever get a chance to read it, I think it was like 1993, 92, where you see, it's great to like look at all the little relics and things behind the maestro in his throne room. Hulk's, Iron Man's helmet, Thor's hammer, Cap's shield, all that, Spidey's mask. So basically the insinuation was in this version of the future, Hulk becomes Maestro and takes out all the heroes and declares himself basically king of the world. And so after the battle between Professor Hulk from the present and Maestro in the future, proper Hulk, Professor Hulk goes back to the present with this sort of idea of, well, now I know what not to do. Now I know not to become this guy, the Maestro. So now flash forward about 4 or 5 years ago, about 4 years ago. Peter David, I think they did have Peter David come back. If not, it might have been Greg Pak. But basically, they decided to do two Maestro miniseries, which
Right.
showed the origin, the actual transition of the Hulk into the Maestro. And in that first miniseries, it turns out that there was somebody who had the name and title of the Maestro prior to Hulk taking on that mantle on his march to world conquest. And that person was Marvel's very own version of Hercules.
Wow. Yes.
Yep.
That,
And
oh, sorry.
oh no, go ahead.
No, that was that again, as you said, it revisited the Maestro storyline and showed you the origins, and they had the two miniseries. Hercules was in the first one, and Hercules was originally the Maestro, and the Hulk took that title from him when he defeated him.
Mm-hmm.
And I like the setting that that was put in because the superheroes that remained were not all that keen on protecting humanity.
Mm-hmm.
It was humanity, not supervillains or aliens or beings from other dimensions that destroyed the Earth. It was humanity that destroyed the Earth. It was humanity that brought about World War III and created the wasteland that everybody found themselves in. And
If
I,
if I remember correctly, at the beginning of that series, Hulk is like in some sort of containment thing underground, and he breaks free and discovers what had happened while he was shut away or locked away.
right, he was having a dream about being with his wife and his children, and everything was happy. But then it started getting glitchy, so he realized that he was in a machine of some sort. And then he came out, and MODOK, who was also
That's
old and decrepit, had kept him there in stasis. And then he goes out to discover the bigger world. And he finds out about, he travels to different places and finds out that New York City is now called Dystopia and that there's a god ruling Dystopia. So he goes there. And in the meanwhile, he meets up with, I think, Machine Man and with Rick, his old friend. And
mm-hmm.
there's then a backup story that happens that has somebody related to Thor because she's worthy enough to pick up Thor's hammer, and that kind of ties into the story later on.
Mm-hmm.
But Hercules too, when the Hulk confronts him with what's he doing, because it seems like he's having lots of sex and ordering people around. And Hercules too said that humanity did this, so might as well just enjoy what life has left to give you, and that's what he's doing.
And it's neat how Hercules is portrayed in that because yes, he is the maestro, he is sort of ruler of this portion of the world, but he's not the Hulk's maestro. The Hulk's maestro is
No,
very bitter and angry, but this is Marvel's Hercules. He's still boisterous and loves to carouse and have a good time and sees himself as a benevolent ruler among his subjects.
and
And,
his fighting even is not mean-spirited or vengeful or full of anger. It's the contest. It's the gift that is always given to heroes and villains in the Marvel Universe a chance to confront me and to what do you call it, do honorable combat.
Yep.
This
And
has that as well.
Hulk's having none of it.
Oh,
Hulk's having none of it, and he does challenge him, and if I recall correctly, defeats him, um, almost definitively, because I know he doesn't show up in the second miniseries, War and Pax. If I remember correctly, Hercules, he's vaporized,
yes, he defeats the Hulk the first time
right?
and trounces him. So the Hulk goes and he gets this gun, and he gets this I guess superhero supervillain, I don't remember, but she can turn into vapor. So
One of the UFOs, yes, yes, yeah.
goes into his nostrils when he comes back, and Hercules greets him, because and Hercules offers to feast him when when Hulk is defeated, and oh come, let us revel in wine, women, and song, and something to that effect. And the Hulk has none of it. Then he comes back when he's sure he can defeat him, and he brings the woman who's actually vapor as a womanly gift, as a like shapely gift to give to Hercules, and then she turns into vapor and poisons him by being inhaled by him. And there's a character in Greek mythology actually called Nephele, who's like
Mm.
a cloud woman. So I thought it was originally like something like that, but it isn't. It's something similar. But then the Hulk betrays her as well. He freezes her, and he has her pieces broken and buried all over the place so that she can never reconstitute herself. And then he burns Hercules on a pyre, and while he's burning, he comes back, and he's even though he's flaming like the Human Torch, he says that Hades revived him so he could take his revenge on the Hulk for this betrayal. And that's when the Hulk uses the gun, or somebody in the had the gun uses the gun to vaporize Hercules. And then he's not in the second miniseries.
Yep.
I got something to ask.
Okay.
General Ross, how? Okay, first off, anybody watching this? 2006, I stopped reading comic books because I became a paranormal investigator and just didn't have time for them. But I do love comics, and every once in a while I'll peek out one and read one. Um, how did General Ross become the Red Hulk?
In the movies, or I don't know about in the comic books. I'm not a huge Hulk fan. In the movies, he
In,
became because
in
he was
either.
manipulating the leader, who was a Hulk villain. He has like the big head, and he can think very advanced. And the leader knew he was being manipulated by Ross, who promised him freedom if he helped him advance his career in certain of his objectives. So, but he didn't believe that Ross would let him go. So he started introducing radioactive substances into the medication that he gave Ross for his heart medicine, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. So that happened in the release earlier this year.
Yeah,
Captain America, he's a brave new bird now, and that follows Sam Wilson now, with the mantle of Cap. But that movie is very much a tying up loose ends that were left over from the 2008 Incredible Hulk movie with Ed Norton as Bruce Banner, and then later he was recast by Mark Ruffalo as
right.
Banner. But because so really quick, what was going on back in 2008? 2008, there was no Marvel Studios. The first Marvel Studios production was Iron Man, famously with Robert Downey Jr., Jon Favreau directing. But that was made by the new Marvel Studios, but it had a distribution deal with Paramount. And that same year, they had Louis Leterrier with as the director. Like I said, Ed Norton as Bruce Banner. They made an Incredible Hulk movie. But the Incredible Hulk rights, distribution rights for live action, are still held by Universal, even to this day. So that movie was released on a distribution deal with Universal. So Iron Man was amazing at the gate. It was lightning in a bottle in a lot of ways, but that created the cash flow basically for Marvel Studios to go and become an autonomous distribution as well as movie making house. So I think the couple movies after that, like Iron Man 2 was still under the Paramount deal. I think even the first Thor movie was on a distribution deal. But after that, it was all Marvel Studios. And so one of the reasons why there hasn't been an actual Hulk movie since 2008's Incredible Hulk is because Universal does not want to give up that property, and Marvel doesn't want to pay that very high distribution fee. So Marvel technically can't just up and make a Hulk movie. They could do a She-Hulk series, right? They could use the Hulk. They could advance his story there. We've seen the Hulk story advance in the Avengers movies, and very famously in Thor Ragnarok, where they kind of did the Planet Hulk movie, right? Where Hulk is a gladiator on an alien world. So since there was no clear opportunity to do an Incredible Hulk 2, but there were some plot threads left over in that movie. One of which Tim Blake Nelson, who was playing Samuel Stearns, gets and he's trying to help Hulk, but to his own means, because he wants to kind of capture that gamma radiated blood. And during the Hulk out before the big fight with the Abomination at the end, Sam Stearns gets knocked into some equipment. A vial of the Hulk's blood starts dripping on the open wound in his head, and we start to see the bubble, right? So here we are now, 2025. They're going to finish that. They're going to resolve that cliffhanger. They're going to resolve that loose end. And so, so as Hercules said, this whole time, Samuel Stearns has been in jail, but has been, helping the government, but really trying to set things up for him to kind of get his moment of revenge and whatnot. And part of that is, lacing President Ross. General Ross is now President Ross, recast, played by Harrison Ford, because unfortunately William Hurt, who was General Ross from 2008 until he passed, unfortunately he passed. Now, I thought it would have been really funny. As great, I love Harrison Ford. I'll watch him in anything. It's more than a cameo in that movie. He's chewing scenery left and right. If you ever told me I'd be watching a movie where Harrison Ford turns into a Hulk, red, green, or otherwise, I'd be like, you're out of your mind. But here we are, around 2025, and but I thought it would have been really fun to mess with fans to just recast Ross with Sam Elliott, because Sam Elliott played General Ross in the Ang Lee Hulk movie from 2003. Which is like not part of the Marvel continuity. It's hinted at a little bit. It's like a squint almost.
They refer to it at times.
Vaguely, yeah. But I thought it would have broken people's brains if they brought back Sam Elliott as Thunderbolt Ross, and they'd be like, "Wait, this movie actually counts now? What's going on?"
Yeah, they what they were doing, and again, I'm very upset at the fans, the haters, or the anti-fans, I guess, because Marvel, it looked like, now that they were trying to wrap up the multiverse saga, was looking to, they didn't announce it, and people didn't notice it because I haven't seen anybody talking about it. They seem to be trying to tie up loose threads.
Mm-hmm.
So they were tying up loose Hulk threads with Captain America 4. Then Ironheart, that seemed to tie up a lot of loose Iron Man threads in terms of Iron Man's partner, and also it introduced Mephisto and promised to tie that dangling thread that's been there for a very long time, or at least lead into some sort of answer to that. And they seem to be, through their movies and programs, to be tying up all these threads. And now they cut the production, so I'm sure there's going to be like threads dangling all over the place again.
Yeah, I mean, they're ramping up to the next year's big movie. Will be Avengers Doomsday. That'll be next Christmas, and then that'll be followed a year later, Christmas 2027, by Avengers Secret Wars. And I think what this is all leading to is it will resolve the multiverse saga. It will do its best, I think, to dangle up most of these loose ends. There are some loose ends, I think, that will never that will never be tied. I think Blade is a wash, which also means Black Knight is a wash. Hopefully we'll get to see Brett Goldstein as Hercules again. There is another Thor movie in development. So that is, or they're talking about that. So that is a possibility.
Doctor Strange's possibility, and they may tie it up there.
Yeah, or they might just use these two Avengers movies to try and wrap everything up, because the rumor is that we'll probably get like a soft reboot after Avengers Secret Wars, and we'll have a new version of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but one that will include a new X-Men team or a recasting of your classic X-Men team, a Fantastic Four that is in the same universe as the rest of the main Marvel characters. So I think that's what they're hoping to accomplish. We'll see. We'll see how this stuff does.
And they just announced that DC and Marvel is planning to do some crossover comic books.
It started already.
It's already begun, yeah.
Batman and Deadpool.
Yeah, so Marvel put out last month a Deadpool Batman one-shot, which has a lead story, and then it has a whole bunch of backup stories of other unlikely team-ups, like Green Arrow and Daredevil, written by Kevin Smith, who has written both of those characters. Frank Miller writes and illustrates a very short story with Dark Knight Returns Batman and Old Man Logan, right? There are a couple other really fun things in there. And so now in November, DC is going to publish a Batman Deadpool one-shot, which will have another lead story with those two characters. That one will be written by Grant Morrison, and then it'll have a whole bunch of backups. And then, yes, this week they did announce, to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first Treasury-sized Superman meets the Amazing Spider-Man, and then about a year or two later, they did an Amazing Spider-Man meets Superman. They announced they're going to reprint both of those in their original size, and there's going to be two new Spider-Man Superman team-ups, one published by DC, one published by Marvel.
John, I had that. I had the 1975 Superman versus Spider-Man comic book.
Yep.
And I was looking at the price of it. The 1975 comic books, it sells as high as $190 if it's in good condition.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. That was monumental because it was the first Titanic team up, true believer, between the two biggest characters from both companies. And there were live action projects in the works while that was being developed, but not the first time that Marvel and DC co-published a comic book. This, right?
Yeah, and also too, do you remember when they had the Superman versus Muhammad Ali comic book?
The greatest comic of all time. I was 3 years old. My dad came back from one of his road trips, and he gave me the biggest comic I'd ever seen. And again, I knew Muhammad Ali because of my dad's work. I of course knew Superman. I love that comic. I actually have the hardcover reprint from a bunch of years ago in the Treasury size, had that signed by Neil Adams. Got to talk to Neil about it a little bit. Neil Adams also remember that iconic cover, right?
Yeah,
where they're in the ring, and then Neil Adams would draw all these very famous people of the day.
Celebrities, Sonny and Cher,
yep,
and everything else.
Jimmy Carter, right?
Yeah.
And for people that he couldn't quite get the likenesses to, like Fonzie, like he couldn't get the rights, he would just draw Henry Winkler's face and then put a mustache on him, or like John Travolta's face with a mustache. About 10 or 15 years ago, Neil Adams redrew that cover for ESPN magazine. Remember magazines, guys? So ESPN, the sports network, had a magazine, and they did a special 100 greatest athletes of all time. And they had Neil Adams redraw that cover with the 1 and 2, top 2 athletes from the list of 100 in the ring, battling it out. And then the rest of the 98 top athletes, Neil Adams drew them watching the fight. And of course, Ali is in that ring, right? And instead of Superman, it's another guy who could fly, Michael Jordan. And when I had seen Neil Adams at one of the New York Comic Cons I got to go to, um, he had a print of that, and I asked him to sign it. I wanted to give it to my dad, and I said, my father is Phil Pepe, and Neil's eyes blew up. He's like, Phil Pepe? He goes, your dad's a legend. And so for me to have somebody I consider a legend telling me that my dad was a legend, and my dad remembered the comic, but he wasn't a big comic guy. But when I told him that, this guy who's a legend in his field is calling you a legend in your field, that really made my dad feel good. And when I gave him that print, funny thing about Neil Adams, if when he was still with us and signing, I remember asking him, can you sign it to John Pepe, or can you sign this to Phil Pepe? And he goes, no, I'm not going to do that. It's like, well, why? And he goes, because you know your last name. Your dad knows his last name. And I found that really funny, because I am trying to assure him I'm not going to resell this. I want this to be personal to me, right? Or personal to my dad. But yeah, he would refuse to put the last name. The other thing, when I had him sign the hardcover reprint of the Superman Muhammad Ali, I said, I want you to sign what you think is the best page. Cause there's like the page where they're shaking hands, right? Or where Superman is beaten up by Muhammad Ali on the stretcher. Like, those are great pages. He goes, I'm signing the cover. The cover is my absolute favorite thing about this comic. I was like, all right, cool. But big digression there. But yeah, the very first co-publication between Marvel and DC was an adaptation, a comic adaptation in that Treasury format of Wizard of Oz.
I remember that too. I had all these. I might still have them in a box somewhere, but I don't think so. I haven't seen them.
I hope they survived the flood.
Yeah. So much fun. All right, so we spent the first half of the show talking about Marvel and shifting into DC Marvel crossovers. Now we'll go the other foot, put it in the DC universe, and start with DC's non-roguish Hercules. So, John, you want to talk about that, or Paul, do you want to talk about that?
There's a couple of things I want to talk about that. I remember, okay, if I remember right, okay, in DC Comics, the DC Universe, in Earth 1, Hercules wore a wolf skin, and he was against the Amazon women, if I remember right. And also, too, I remember with DC, they had Hercules with blonde hair, they had him with black hair, and they also, too, and I recall, red hair. So there was all these different variants, and he considered Wonder Woman as his half sister. Am I correct about this, or is this just something I dreamed up?
DC and Marvel. Marvel was a bit more consistent with Hercules than DC, but DC was very inconsistent with Hercules. They based his being a bad guy on the Hercules' labor where he gets the girdle of Ares from the Amazons. And that myth has so many different interpretations. One interpretation is that they would gladly give him the belt and they were feasting and everything was going great. But one of the Greeks who didn't like the idea of women warriors told his men that the Amazons were attacking, so they attacked first. Or one of the Amazons who didn't like the idea of Hippolyta treating all these men like honored guests, and she grumbled and ascribed bad motives to them, so the Amazons revolted. And some said that Hera, who hated Hercules in the Greek tales, disguised herself as an Amazon and wrought havoc. But and then some accounts Hippolyta lived, in some accounts she died. There's all sorts of stories. He said, she said, this happened, that happened. So the guy who did Wonder Woman, who also brought us the lie detector test, that's why she has a lie detecting lariat. He did an interpretation where Hercules was a very barbarous, uncouth person, and he enslaved and defeated and enslaved the Amazons. So yes, they had him. And in some later interpretations, like with Perez, Wonder Woman was the daughter of Zeus, and she wasn't made out of clay as she was in the earlier stories. So she would be Hercules' half sister. And DC had not only different hair colored Herculeses, but sometimes Superman was Hercules. Sometimes Hercules was a rival of Superman for Lois Lane's affections. So they didn't have the story straight. The Hercules Unbound was the first time they tried to make him a hero. So they had he looked like a wrestler, but a clean cut wrestler. He didn't have a beard. He was very clean shaven, and he was youthful and he was heroic. And he woke up after being enslaved on a rock in the Mediterranean Sea and woke up in the post-apocalyptic world. So that's where we first find Superman. And I'll pass the baton back to John.
So just to touch back on the origins of Wonder Woman as created by William Moulton Marston, what I remember from that original flavor, Golden Age origin, it was actually, wasn't it Heracles? Didn't he actually use it as Heracles? Yep. And he chained and bound the Amazonian women. But when they broke free, they got rid of the chains, but they kept the bracelets. And those are what Wonder Woman's bulletproof bracelets, if I remember correctly from that very original Wonder Woman origin, that's the origin of the bulletproof bracelets. They were actually the bracelets from the chains that Heracles used to imprison the Amazons.
Right, and I wear bracers. In all the time you've known me, I've worn bracers. I've had the bracers my whole life. And I've worn them for much of my life. Different bracers, they eventually wear out.
Right.
But it's the same thing. I've committed myself to a particular life path, but there's no chains there. I do it on my own free will, and these bracers are my commitment. It's like wearing a wedding ring or something, or an engagement ring or something. This is to my spiritual path. So yes, I remember that origin also.
So as far as the Hercules Unbound series, which I believe was 1982, correct?
I believe it was around that time, yes.
Yeah. So now, while I have not read that series, but it was illustrated by Walt Simonson, correct?
Walt Simonson and Wally Wood, I think.
And Wally Wood, yeah. So because Walt Simonson was doing a lot of work for DC at that time, and here's why I think that miniseries exists. That Hercules Unbound miniseries is the direct result of two things, and they're kind of interconnected. The early 80s saw a huge resurgence in sword and sandal media, right? Conan had famously come to Marvel in 1971 and had been popular throughout the 70s. And that started a little bit of the barbarian aesthetic kind of revival in comics, or resurgence of that in comics. But very famously in 1980, 81, there was the Conan movie.
Right.
John Milius, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Conan, What is Best in Life. Everybody knows this movie. And what's really interesting too is that right around that time, a company called Mattel was developing a kid-friendly sword and sandal barbarian toy line.
And Conan, but Conan was rated R, and they couldn't proceed with the Conan. So
it's a little more nuanced. That actually, Titan Comics has a Conan the Barbarian YouTube page. They just did a video about this, and they actually looked at all the court filings and the rulings. This is what Mattel did, because Mattel was smart. They had actually begun developing the He-Man toy line, but then saw that there was a Conan movie in development, and not wanting to get burned like they did with Star Wars, they decided to snatch up the Conan toy license in the hopes that they could make toys on that and maybe have a He-Man and Conan line simultaneously, right?
I didn't know that. Okay.
Then they saw that this Conan, as they say, was in this video, lousy with blood and boobs, and so they couldn't do a kids' toy line on that. So they just went ahead with He-Man, and yet held on to the Conan toy license because they didn't want anybody else to secure that license to challenge He-Man. And it wasn't until a few years later, when they let the license lapse, that Remco comes in and does their very small line of Conan figures.
I used to have all those figures once.
But Remco also had a line of DC figures branded as Enter the Realm of Warlord, right?
Yes,
that character.
The Hercules figures.
And who wound up in that? Hercules Unbound winds up as a figure in that Remco line. Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I'm sitting. I had that figure.
Nice, nice. So basically that was one part of it, was this resurgence in the sword and sandal aesthetic in media. Also, in the wake of that Conan movie, aside from other imitators, and I think due in part to a lot of the 20-30 year nostalgia cycle, Lou Ferrigno was Hercules in 2 movies in the early 80s, right around that time, 82, 83.
Right.
And which were very much throwbacks to the old Peplum movies. There's just,
With science fiction elements added in.
of course, yes, yeah.
And all sorts of stuff.
And laser swords, and yeah. And so now Hercules, there's a couple Hercules movies being developed, but the bigger piece in the world of comics is that Bob Layton, about a year before Hercules Unbound comes out, does his first Hercules miniseries. And that was a huge hit for Marvel. Right. And that and the 4-issue Wolverine series by Chris Claremont and Frank Miller kind of launched the miniseries aesthetic in comics. So DC was definitely capitalizing on the popularity of Marvel's Hercules miniseries that Bob Layton had just completed by trying to push out their own Hercules Unbound. That's my take on it. That's how it feels like it times out to me, that there was just a lot of Hercules in the zeitgeist at that time, and that DC was just trying to capitalize on something that they thought was going to be a thing.
That makes a lot of sense. And I'm glad we got a chance to talk to Bob Layton, and he was one of my favorite Hercules authors for Marvel, and I really enjoyed that conversation. You want me to tell the story then? Okay, this is a very outline and sketchy, but
again, really quick, big tell how much that Hercules Unbound was influenced by the Layton Hercules, because the Bob Layton Hercules miniseries takes place in the far future of the Marvel universe, and as you said, Hercules Unbound takes place in the far future of the DC universe.
The DC universe. The Third World War has come and gone. What do you call it? The world is devastated. People survive, but many of them are mutated. And Hercules is awakened, and he's been bound to a rock. There's a kid and his dog in a boat fighting a monster. Hercules, of course, breaks his chains and goes and helps the kid defeat the monster, discovers the kid is blind. His name is Kevin, and he has a dog named Basil, which means king in Greek. So then Kevin explains what had happened, and he was looking for his father, who was at the Vatican City. So they go to Vatican City, and they meet up with Ares, and Ares has them fight a mutant, and the mutant turns out to be Kevin's father mutated. Then they travel around, and again, this is sketchy and probably erroneous spots, but this is what I remember. Then they went around to different places. They went throughout Europe. They went to the Americas. They had a lot of adventures. They picked up a fashion model named Jen, who was the companion. They picked up other companions who came and went, but mostly it was Hercules, Kevin, Jen, and Basil. Both Jen and Basil die at some point, but then they're brought back by the end of the series. And Hercules finds out that his being imprisoned was due to his brother Ares, who used to be his friend as well as his brother, and then for some reason entrapped him for some petty reason. And Kevin is acting stranger and stranger, and he's developing all these powers that seem to be psychic. And they meet up with the Atomic Knights, and for one of the letters pages I remember reading, it said that their intention was to blend it in with the Atomic Knights, OMAC, and Kamandi, which were other post-apocalyptic comics that they had, and to make Hercules part of that bigger universe, which was expanding. But they never got a chance to do that. And what happens at after all these meetings with divine, semi-divine, and science fiction people and creatures, is that the Olympians tried to shed off their baser instincts and to ascend, but something went wrong, and they gave birth to anti-gods, and they were trapped in Olympus and mostly powerless. So, of course, Hercules does like they do in one of those movies with the Muppets and tries to blend them back together again. And that seems to do the trick. And Kevin, it turns out, was the anti-Olympian of Ares.
Hmm.
So,
And OMAC is one man army corps.
okay, yeah, I never got into Olmec, so I didn't know. Commandi I read periodically. It was like Planet of the Apes, but with other animals, including
Yeah.
it. And they meet a talking ape at one point in their adventures.
So Hercules, what did you think of that Hercules Unbound series? Did it have a good ending, or did it really feel open-ended, like there was going to be more?
It felt like there was going to be more, and because again, the gods were restored, and so the gods will be active in the guises in which we knew them, and not in this Skeksis and other form type of thing. Like in that, what is that movie? I forget which one, where these beings separated themselves in two, and was some of them became like vultures, and there was another form of them. Labyrinth, was it, or
Dark Crystal.
Dark Crystal? Yeah,
Yeah.
it looked like it was lifted from Dark Crystal or inspired by Dark Crystal.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was looking forward because again, I liked Commandi. I hadn't read OMAC. I didn't know too much about OMAC, but the Atomic Knights seemed okay from the Hercules comics, and it was collected into a black and white collection, not a color collection, with the Atomic Knights stuff when they reissued
That's
it.
right.
So I had that in a box somewhere as well.
Real. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Oh yeah. I would like to say something about Wonder Woman, the half sister of Hercules. The creator of Wonder Woman was William Moulton Marston.
Hmm.
And this is probably something that John Pepe knows about because he's like a walking encyclopedia about comic books. But I heard, okay, and tell me if I'm wrong, that William Moulton Marston was somewhat perverted.
They made a about it.
Early Wonder Woman comics showed Wonder Woman in situations of bondage and
Yes.
restraint.
Yeah.
And he tried to make it sound nice. He says, well, what I'm trying to represent here is how women are tied down. You know, they're tied down through marriage, they're tied down through domestic life, they're tied down with expectations from society. So, and Wonder Woman, she would be seen in early comics. And I think my dad had a couple in the attic that I looked at where she is bound and gagged. And it
Yes.
looked like something out of a porno thing. What do you guys think about that?
They
So
made about that.
yeah. So there, yeah, Hercules, right? There was a movie. So William Moulton Marston was in a polyamorous relationship with his wife and another woman. I think from what I've heard, I haven't seen that movie, but from what I've heard about the movie, that's that, and the fact that he created Wonder Woman is about all that they got right.
Really?
I have heard.
About.
Yeah, I have heard from surviving members of the family that most of that movie was just fictional.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I haven't
I,
seen the movie. I can't judge. I don't know, but yet there are the facts that yes, he was involved in a polyamorous relationship, and yes, those early Wonder Woman comics did have a lot of bondage, and I get his psychiatrist, because he was a psychiatrist. I get his psychiatrist justification for that. But if you look at other comic books of that era, as well as what was going on in the girly art realm, shortly after the golden age, shortly after the end of the 40s, early 50s, Betty Page starts to come to prominence, photographed by Bunny Yeager. The bondage aesthetic was a very popular thing in media especially in comics. You look at any female-led comic of that day, Phantom Lady, Black Cat, all these other, almost every other cover is a bondage cover. Now,
Wow.
granted, Marston did put a couple other things like the character of Etta Candy and the Holiday Girls, a lot of things that are definitely feeding into that, well, rather than pervert, we'll say sexually awakened mindset that William Bolton Marston had.
Whoa.
But I think it was more of a money thing. I think it was a sex sells. I think it was a bondage sells. Let's throw that in there, which again bit him in the ass when Dr. Frederick Verdum came coming along and said, "Look at what your kids are reading." Right?
Yeah,
Right.
and there were people who were imitating comics and making X-rated versions of them. Because I'm a Popeye fan, and I've seen Popeye porn from way back when.
The old Tijuana Bibles. The
Yeah,
old Tijuana Bibles. Yep.
the comic book characters doing all these things that they normally wouldn't be doing, wouldn't be appearing in the four-color comic book.
Oh, even like Little Abner, that was sort of in that realm.
Yeah, those are times that have passed.
Yeah.
Speaking of times that have passed, I want to touch on something that we were talking about before with the first Superman, Spider-Man. It just got me thinking, because we talk about multiverses a lot, and DC and Marvel both had established multiverses, but it was that first team up was so quaint, because what is the reasoning for the fact that Spider-Man and Superman have never met before? It's because Spider-Man operated in Manhattan and Superman operated in Metropolis, and Superman just happens, Clark and Lois just happened to be going to New York to cover something for the Daily Planet, where Peter's there for the Daily Bugle. I kind of miss those days of intercompany crossovers where you didn't have to have a multiversal justification for it.
Right.
It was just like, oh, I round the corner and there's this guy I've never met before. Let's fight and then team up.
And Marvel and DC include each other's superheroes in their movies. Like in the TV shows, I was a big fan of, and I still am a big fan of the one with John Cena, Peacemaker.
Peacemaker, yes, there was a Spider-Man reference.
There was a Spider-Man meme reference.
Yep. The CW shows were lousy with that too, mentioning the Marvel movies. I went on this rant on my podcast, the indie comic podcast that I do with Angel, because this is something that does irk me, because Spider-Man wouldn't really exist if there were no Action Comics #1, Detective Comics #27 in 1938 and 1939. So therefore, yes, you could make the case that nature abhors a vacuum, so that if you're in a world where those comics didn't exist, that maybe somebody in the 60s would have come along and created Spider-Man. It doesn't wash with me. It is such a weird disconnect, pulls me out of that world in that respect, that if you're in a world where there's a Superman and there's a Batman, there would probably be no Spider-Man as a comic book, or because the other thing that in those worlds is the comic books are also, especially in Marvel, comic books do exist, but they're fictionalized versions of the actual superheroes that are out there.
Plus Marvel with their new universe with Jim Shooter or Jim Starlin, I forget who did the new universe.
Yep.
They had that the comic books were stories that were tapped into from things that happened in another related timeline or universe.
That's a DC Gardner Fox thing. First, Barry Allen as the Flash. He's reading Flash Comics #1 with the Jay Garrick Flash, which later was, oh, that was Earth 2, and Gardner Fox would have these dreams of another world, and then he would write these comics. Yeah, so that's an old trope, which I do dig. I think Alan Moore did it the best in Watchmen, where basically in the world of Watchmen, there was an Action Comics #1, there was a Detective Comics 27, but since there were already lunatics running around fighting crime in costume in reality, nobody read superhero comics, and they died and were forgotten about. And the popular comic genre was pirate comics.
And Watchmen is now in the DC universe.
It's its own thing. Yeah. But
Oh, yeah.
it's a world where those comics existed and fell flat. So the only comics people read are pirate comics. I think it's brilliant.
And check this out, okay? In New York, they have a building. It's called the Flatiron Building, and it's sort of like this.
Uh-huh.
And it points out. Well, okay, inside that building, the boys 7 have their headquarters, and also too, the Daily Bugle has their office up there too, and John Wick hung out in front of that building. So in a way, it all crosses over John Wick, the Spider-Man, and the 7.
Well, that's the thing, Marvel likes to do, they don't like to do reboot, they like to do sliding time scale. But one of the great selling points of the first 30, 40 years of Marvel Comics was it was the world outside your window. And you go back, you read those old comics, they are so contemporary to what's happened. I think the Beatles were at Reed and Sue's wedding, it's like things like that were so, they were so in tune to the zeitgeist of the time, that it again, the sliding time scale, I get you have to keep these characters perpetually young, but when you basically take Frank Castle out of Vietnam and then have him be, a more modern war veteran, it just doesn't, that doesn't ring true to the character, especially when you look at movies like First Blood, which does a great job of illustrating the ostracization and the mental fallout for these guys who fought in Vietnam, that it really works so much better for Frank Castle, right? And that era, that early 1970s era when he first appeared. And so again, sliding time scale, I'm of two minds about it. Not the biggest fan of it though.
And then look at this: you have Nick Fury, who Samuel L. Jackson version, and you have the Hasselhoff version.
Yes.
I remember Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, and I was confused when I saw Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury.
Well, again, that's another offshoot. In the early 2000s, Marvel created the Ultimate Comics line, fresh interpretations of the early days of these characters in a modern setting, so no younger reader had to feel intimidated by 40, 50 years of backstory. And one of the books called The Ultimates, which was their Avengers book, was illustrated by a man named Brian Hitch, who loves to cast actors as his characters in the comics. So he drew Bruce Banner to look like Steve Buscemi, and he very famously was said, you do who you want for Nick Fury. So he made Nick Fury, he patterned Nick Fury in that comic after Samuel L. Jackson. Wow. Samuel L. Jackson sees this comic and says, well, that's a great idea. If you're making movies, can I be this Nick Fury? And that's where we're at.
Wow. And on that note, we need to start wrapping up. I just want to add a couple of things, how my universe intersected with the universes that you were describing. When I was Thor the Barbarian, I used to interact a lot with the Todd McFarlane people. And there was a picture of me holding my sword and my furs and leathers at the lunchroom in Todd McFarlane's company. And Todd had told me that if I ever make it big with Thor the Barbarian, he'd make the action figure. But Thor the Barbarian fizzled out after a while. But that was my connection there. And we were I forget what happened. Something happened in New York and we couldn't film it. But I was when I was interviewing people, we'd get tattoos. So we're going to do that with somebody from Todd McFarlane. We're going to get tattoos during the interview. So that was one of my interactions, and also with Peter David. At one point, before I did Thor the Barbarian, I developed my own outer space science fiction world. So I was trying to sell it. And John Delancey was introducing me to different people. And I was trying to sell my concept. And I met Peter David at some convention through John Delancey. And I got to hang out with Peter David. He was a great person. I loved his New Frontier and Star Trek. That's my favorite Star Trek. And I'm going to miss him. He was really, really great to talk to and to hang out with.
Mhm. And unfortunately, it's an example of why there's you know, the healthcare system in this country is needs a lot of work, especially for a lot of creators, because unfortunately, yeah, his health was getting worse and the bills were mounting and he just couldn't stay ahead of it. And fortunately, there are some uh, groups out there that raise money to help retired comic creators in their twilight years, but not enough is being done. Not enough is being done.
Maybe we can do something about that in the not too distant future. John,
And I saw a video where too that this guy was giving Stan Lee a hard time, and Stan Lee didn't want to go back up on stage, and he says you have to go back up there.
yeah,
And
those are
yeah,
stories. I've heard several variations of those stories. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into them today, so we will save that for another day. John, how can people get in contact with you?
Well, you can find me on Facebook at John Carlyastrzemski Pepe. You can also be sure to catch me every month on the Pep Talk on this very YouTube channel, part of Hercules Invictus's Mount Olympus podcasting network, and proud of it.
And you also do, as you mentioned, another podcast.
So I do have another, that YouTube page is Indie Creator Comics. Every week, Angel Santiago and I review indie comic number ones. We also love to interview indie comic creators. So we got a bunch of those interviews up there as well. And as always, you can always find me at The Joker's Child in Fair Lawn, New Jersey, where I'm slinging comics every day we're open.
That is awesome. And Paul, where can people find you? You're no longer in the comic book world so much, although we keep dragging you back into it.
oh, you guys are pulling me in. Yeah, gosh. I mean, and also too, I learned so much from John and from Hercules on comic books. I mean, you guys are catching me up, and that's scary. But anyway, to get a hold of me, all you have to do is Google Bing Paul Dale Roberts. If you want to see some of my books, Paul Dale Roberts books, I have a bunch of ebooks out there. And I throw in comic book stuff into my paranormal books because I still love comic books. So anyway, that's how you find me.
Awesome. And as you both of you guys know, I started an Age of Heroes initiative. The first Age of Heroes initiative was done decades ago in New York and Brooklyn. Before computers became so widespread, there was a gap between people who had computers and people who didn't. And it was creating a new gap. So I declared that this is Ganinga Gap, the gaping void in Norse mythology, and I gathered Argonauts to help me combat this. And we got people to donate computers and space, and people donated time, and we created in Brooklyn a place where people can come and learn about computers and use computers. And we had our own comic strip in Big News, and we had spots on local cable, and I was knighting people with a sword. And so maybe we can come up with a real life superhero or Argonaut adventure thing to help people who are creative and who've enriched our lives, but who find themselves in this difficult spots now that they're retired or semi-retired. So I'll plant that seed there and let's see what we come up with. Thank you very much, gentlemen. You're awesome. You made my day, and I enjoyed the conversation and the memories. And I wish you well, and I wish you great success. And I'll see you very soon.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Bye,
thank.
guys.
Bye.